You're back in session with Professor P. Glad to see you. I hope you're staying safe and healthy. All right, we are going to talk about understanding and explaining culture. So we're going to talk about some of the theories and methods in the field of cultural anthropology and anthropology. This chapter 4, there is a little mix of chapter 3, but the publishers did something funky. So we're going to be talking about some of the theories. That's why the lecture's good. So the lecture gives you what you missed out on. So what we're going to start out is we're going to start out with the theories and approaches in cultural anthropology. Okay. And it becomes important to understand because we want to talk about a theoretical orientation. A theoretical orientation is just a way we explain cultural phenomena. It's a way we explain the world in the field of science. There's lots of different theoretical approaches you can come from. A lot of you have taken sociology class. You hear about functionalism and structuralism, right? We look at cultural ecology, things like that. Those are all theories and theoretical approaches. We could all have the same data, study the same culture, but from a different theoretical perspective, it's explained differently. All right, let's start out with early cultural evolution. Early cultural evolution came out of the field of Edward Tyler and Lewis Henry Morgan. Follow along on your concept sheets if you printed them out. And Lewis Henry Morgan, Edward Tyler comes up with this early cultural evolution. It was very racist. It was actually not a great theoretical approach. And basically, it put people into stages of development. So you could be savage, right? Your culture was simple, and you were living in hordes, you didn't understand culture, you didn't live in families. Like, it just was really a way to put people into stages of development. And you went from like simple to complex in a progressive manner. And it becomes important because what they really wanted you to understand is that you should strive to be like us, which that's not the goal here. The goal is people are adapting in their own environments, right? At their own rates, in their own times, and within their own culture. So we don't want to put people into stages because that's the development of discrimination, stereotyping, racism, and all that other stuff. So early cultural evolution was not a really great theoretical approach. All right, well, let's get to diffusion. Diffusion is just the borrowing of cultural traits between society, okay? Diffusion, there's different schools of diffusion, but it wasn't a bad theory. But it's really, these borrowing of cultural traits is really a way societies influenced one another, okay? There's 3 different schools of thought. The first one is the British school of thought. The British believe this, that people borrow from people because they're non-inventive. They were uninventive people. And they believed, which not everybody believed, that everything diffused from Egypt. So that all the cultural traits we have today spread out of Egypt historically, and that we sort of have them now. We have to really think critical about that. There were societies that pre-existed Egypt. Not everything is from Egypt, but that's what they sort of thought. The German school of thought was that people were uninventive, but people borrowed from everywhere, not just Egypt. Okay? The American school of thought came out of Kroeber, and at UC Berkeley, there's Kroeber Hall. And the American school of thought felt like there were these cultural centers, and diffusion was outward and multi-directional. So everybody was borrowing from every place, right? So people would borrow from me, I would borrow from you, you'd borrow from them, and that it was going in a way. And they believe the reason that happened is because people were very inventive, all right? They had a positive view of people. Historical particularism, the next sort of approach, came out of the school of Franz Boas, who's the father of American anthropology, or was considered to be the father of American anthropology. Franz Boas was an opponent. He was against cultural evolutionary ideas. He believed fieldwork and living with the people was vital to understanding the history of who people were. Observation, he stressed, and he says, we have to analyze the history to understand the people within their own context. He really believed in cultural relativism. It's the core foundation of anthropology, where you have to analyze people within their own opportunities and within their own environment, right? That becomes important. All right, psychological approaches. Psychological anthropology analyzed the relationship between culture and group personality. It becomes important to sort of understand psychological approaches because Margaret Mead was really the founder of that. She was a student of Franz Boas, but she wanted to actually analyze group personality and group behavior. The difference is with regular psychology, they analyze individual personality, individual behavior. Anthropology, as you'll understand, we analyze big populations and big groups. All right, let's get to functionalism. Functionalism is important. Some of you guys may have heard about functionalism from sociology and other courses. Functionalism really wants to analyze how all the parts keep the system functioning as a whole system. Let's take culture. If culture is a system and you have art and marriage and music and gender, and all of these different things, everything fits in to keep the cultural system functioning. Functionalism, let's take an automobile. Without the engine, it wouldn't drive. Without the wheels, you wouldn't be able to drive. An automobile is like the cultural system. Every part of the automobile keeps it running in a smooth fashion. A refrigerator, right? Everything within that refrigerator keeps the food good. It keeps the system functioning, right? Functionalism is like that. Every part helps to maintain the whole system, right? It doesn't mean if marriage is part of the system, you're going to get married. It just means it's there as a cultural trait. You guys understand this whole thing makes the cultural system, all the parts to it, make the cultural system keep functioning as a whole system. All right, that's the functionalist approach. All right, and Malinowski's there because he was considered to be the father of British anthropology, and he was a functionalist. All right, let's move on. Let's get to the next concept on your concept sheet, which is NeoEvolution. NeoEvolution is a really cool sort of theoretical approach, but it wants to look at how technology expands and changes culture. So a neo-evolutionist can look at the computer, the cell phone. I mean, just sit back and think how much technology has changed your culture. I always tell, when we're in the classroom, I tell my students, think about a computer. How did it actually physically change your behavior? You shop online now. You buy your books online. You now have food delivered. We don't really necessarily even have to leave our homes because of computers, right? Now we don't even write letters anymore. We email, we text, right? It changed our whole writing and communication system, right? Everything about technology has changed is what a neo-evolution is. Remember, be cautious of a lot of these theories. You don't have to agree with them, but it's a way to look at life. It's a way to analyze cultural phenomena, right? And biological phenomena. So that becomes important. Neo-evolutionists would look at everything, automobiles, transportation, every form of technology and how it changes culture. All right, good. Let's get to structuralism. Structuralism is very interesting. It's really an approach that wants to look at the human mind, and it wants to look at the structure of the human mind and cognition. And one of the things that structuralists say is that we look at society in terms of binary oppositions. If I say black, you say white. If I say tall, you say short. If I say fat, you say skinny. If I say old, you say young. We got to be cautious of that too, because we might not look at binaries. We could be looking at multiple perspectives. So a functionalist really believes in analyzing those binary oppositions, and that people look at the world in terms of that binary structuralist approach. All right, we're going to skip ethnoscience. Don't need to know it. Let's get to cultural ecology. Cultural ecology is an approach that they want to understand how cultures sort of adapt in their environments. It's the relationship between culture and its environment, okay? This is a very hot theory. A lot of people are cultural ecologists. They want to look at the environment. They want to look at how people are adapting to their environment. As you can see on your concept sheet, it has a term that says Sembaga. It's a silent T, but it's the Sembaga people. And the Sembaga people are considered to be the pig people that live in New Guinea. And basically, the pigs play a vital role in their adaptation. So they have this huge population of pigs. The pigs play their janitors. The pigs are their horticulturalists and agriculturalists. They sort of till the soil. They sort of eat up all the garbage. But the pigs also can cause a lot of turmoil because the pigs can go in other people's yards and destroy their yards. So then you could kill the pigs, right? So with all of the good role the pigs play, they also play a negative role. But in order to have a resolution of conflict, at the end of the year, they have a big pig feast. They eat a lot of carnitas, I say. And they sort of restore the environment. What do you do at a feast? You drink, you celebrate, you have fun, you resolve conflict, and then it starts up again. Then there's a lot of pigs in the environments. The pigs play a vital role. The pigs start to get into people's yard. They kill the pigs. They have a big pig feast, yada, yada. It really shows an example of how people are relating to their environment. If you take us, we could look at, recycling. We could look at droughts. We could look at going green. We could look at, all of these sort of ecological movements, right? All part of cultural ecology. All right, great. Let's get to political economy. Political economy is a theoretical approach that wants to look at how state societies transform other societies, right? Political economists can look at colonization, imperialism. They look at the worldwide economy, okay? One anthropologist by the name of Eric Wolf wanted to look at how communities developed in spite of colonization. He had an interesting perspective because he wanted to look at sugar canes, he wanted to look at plantation life, but what he said is this: despite a slave life, he says, we have to understand they lived in community, that they created families, language, music, and song. He wanted to give people active agency within the system. So we know slavery is terrible. Slavery was horrific. It was bad. It oppressed people. It was discriminatory. But at the same time, Eric Wolf said, even with that identity, right, they were humans creating culture, creating life, raising children, and that they had a positive identity that was, not a part of the identity that was put upon them, right? So that became very interesting. Another area, Emmanuel Wallerstein came up with the world systems theory. Emmanuel Wallerstein wanted to look at how capitalism and the whole system of capitalism, and he wanted to analyze how developed nations exploited underdeveloped nations. So we're like the core nation. We're the core, right? We're the world power that we exploit like third world countries. We'll take their resources, their labor, and things like that. So we could look at offshore factories. We could look at, taking resources from other countries, third world countries. We call that the periphery. So we're the core, and they look at the relationship between the periphery states, which are third world countries. A semi-periphery is that they're not really third world or first world. They're like Japan. They're sort of like in the middle. All right, that becomes important to sort of understand. All right, let's skip sociobiology. Let's get to feminist approaches. Feminists want to look at the role of women in society, but really they wanted to look at the women and women in academia. They wanted to give women, it was really a political movement. It wasn't about male haters. It was just giving women a voice in the academic institution, right? To say we need to study women's studies. We can't just look at them as being mothers, right? We have to look at what were women doing during the Ice Age, right? What were women's roles throughout time, right? Let's admit them into academia. Let's have women's studies classes, right? Let's do that, right? It doesn't necessarily mean they were male haters. All right. Postmodernism. A postmodern approach was an approach basically that wanted to look at how people in power shaped your reality. It was very interesting, but it really wanted to look at how everything was in a state of flux, things were fragmented, and that people in power shape your reality. Okay? All right, let's move on. Interpretive approaches by Clifford Geertz. Clifford Geertz was very interesting. Clifford Geertz said culture is like a literary text. We have to analyze the meaning and how the ethnographer interprets it, and the anthropologist is the ethnographer. He said we're like intercultural translators, right? So that we have to incorporate ourselves in the writing as well. So it can't just be we're separate as anthropologists, but that we're in it. Early on in anthropology, our voice was very unimportant. Now, what was our experiences like to learn about the culture as well? The ethnographer is like a novelist, right? Like a literary writer, right? And we have to interpret the culture right. All right, get to your other side of the concept sheet. Let's get to explanation. What are the two kinds of explanations in the field of science? The first one is an association or relationship. The second one is a theory. An association or a relationship just says two things are related, like a brother and a sister. A theory is a complicated way of explaining that. So a brother and a sister are related is just a mere association or relationship. A theory is going to say, are they step? Are they half? Did they live together? Did they have the same mom? Did they have the same dad? Did they live in the same geographical region? You see that? It makes it very complicated. Darwin's theory of natural selection. There's a relationship, right, between adaptation and survival. But the theory is going to say three things have to happen. We have to have variation, differential reproductive success. You see, the theory explains it in a very complicated way. All right, let's get to falsification. That's just proving a theory's wrong. That's part of science. Single case analysis is just this. A single case analysis says this. We want to explain a particular custom. We want to explain maybe something like gender, right? A single custom. A comparative study wants to analyze and look at and compare different societies and different traits within those societies. Okay, I'm going to compare Japan and China. I'm going to compare the United States with Germany, and I'm going to look at marriage, right? So it's big comparisons. Operational definition, that's another thing. It just wants you to explain your procedure. Define your procedure. Define yourself. All right? Sampling universe is just the community, the culture of study. If somebody was going to come in and look at LMC students, the sampling universe is LMC students. If I specialize in the Maya. My sampling universe is the Maya. The sampling universe is just the community of study. All right, culture shock. All of you have been in culture shock. You don't have to leave, the United States to get into culture shock. But culture shock is just a little psychological disorientation because you're not familiar with the culture, right? So if some of you traveled outside of the United States, you might go into culture shock, right? Some of you can go to a friend's house and go into culture shock because of the smells or they eat differently. It doesn't mean they're different. It doesn't mean it's bad. It just means it's a little bit different. So you got to get used to it, right? A little psychological disorientation. Maybe foods, language, going into a house that speaks a different language. Maybe even going to San Francisco and riding BART. Or maybe going into San Francisco and all the traffic and the noise put you into a little culture shock, right? All of you have probably been in culture shock in a little grade or another. All right. An ethnography is just a written description of the culture. It's a book. Participant observation is what we do when we're with the society. We live with the people. We write about the people. We take notes. We interview. We question. We do sampling survey. It's everything we do when we live with the people. Field work is just a term we use. That is the heart of anthropology. We have to go out and live with the people. We have to go out and do field work. No other discipline has to do that. We do for a year or so. All right. An informant are people who live within the society and they give you information about the society. A lot of times you're going to have a lot of informants. There's only a few more terms, stick with me. Within culture comparison is where you're within a culture and you're comparing different families within that society, right? You're comparing individuals, you're comparing families within the same society. A regional controlled comparison is just that. You're comparing similar regions, all right? So let's take Mexico. Maybe some of you are going to compare Michoacan with Mexico City, right? You're going to look at a regional controlled comparison. Cross-cultural research are worldwide researches. So you're going to say, I'm going to study Germany versus the United States. Those are big comparison, looking at trends and things like that. The last one is ethnohistory. Ethnohistory really wants to look at documents, right? They're going to analyze all these different documents to write about the culture. So you're going to go to the library. You're going to go to government offices. You're going to look at diary notes, right? You're going to look at everything written about a culture and write your own ethnography. I know this was a crazy little chapter, the theories and explanations. I try to make it as easy as possible. I hope you're staying safe and healthy. I'll see you next time. You are in session with Professor P. Thank you. Have a good day.